Welcome, everybody. I'm David Madison, the Executive Director of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools. So glad that you're joining us today, either live or watching the on-demand version in our webinar library. And today we're going to look at nurturing school-wide SEL. We're joined by the Institute for Social and Emotional Learning, and I'm going to turn it over to Rush Frank.
Thank you so much, David. We are so excited to be here today and talk to you just a little bit about social emotional learning. There's so much we could share. So this will be a brief glimpse at school-wide social emotional learning. And I think we're excited to talk to you a little bit more about how it can really be integrated into school-wide systems. So that's a little slant that we'll do today. I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Hazeman-Smith, a dear friend and colleague who will talk in just a minute. We're going to get started just recognizing that this is all about children, children of all ages, and we care so much about their growth and potential, and the fact that social emotional learning can be taught at any age is really powerful. We now have research to back that up, and so we've seen a huge increase in our work at all ages because communities, schools, parents are all really engaged and interested in providing this kind of education for their students. Even though it's not new, I think you all know that the study of the self has been around for such a long, long time. But thankfully, more and more schools are aware that educating the whole child is really the best way to really empower them and allow them to make really great decisions for themselves. This is our mission for our organization, and we'd love to share it with you. We are all educators and have been in the classroom, and we're really passionate about bringing this work to schools and communities, even to parents as well, because we know that a lot of this work is done at home, and we'd love to partner with parents. And we also know that it's really the systems, not just the classroom teacher, that bring this alive in schools. This is the rest of our team. We wanted to acknowledge those who aren't here with us today. We have a fabulous team of educators from all over, and we just thought we'd let you see them. A lot of them are teaching right now virtually somewhere in the world. And this is a list of just some of the schools that we work with, and we really wanted to share this because we wanted to say that schools all over, as I mentioned earlier, are really trying to implement social emotional learning in their school day as much as they can and where they see fit, and really try to educate their teachers that this work is really embedded in great teaching. A lot of teachers are already and have been doing this work, and we're excited to show teachers just more and more creative ways that they can add social emotional learning in their classroom. We're doing a lot of work internationally, and actually we're learning a lot from them right now as they've been doing more virtual work a little bit longer than we have with the situation of the coronavirus. So we're really excited, and we've also been invited by a lot of organizations and communities to work with them. You'll see Boys and Girls Club, we have Stanford Medical School. We're really passionate about working with schools, but we do know that there are a lot of organizations that want to improve in their social emotional learning work. Over to you.
Thank you. So we wanted to start off really with maybe the lens through which you in your schools are seeing this work of social emotional learning. We've had the honor of working with a good number of Episcopal schools in the last few years, and we found them to be very natural partners for this work, huge appetite for this type of education. And in the work we've done, we've seen the opportunity for schools to take the pockets of good practice that are already happening and to take those and broaden them and deepen them and make them into a more system-wide, school-wide, connected approach. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful in the language of the Episcopal education tenets is these 2 of the 5 that really relate to this work as we see it. And I know these are familiar to all of you, but this idea of meaningful integrated community service. We're big proponents of the connection between social and emotional learning and community service and being in service to others, and how that work really is a prime opportunity for SEL, for those skills and those competencies we'll outline in a moment to come alive in a real life situation. But also the other tenet that you can see here around dignity of every human being being respected. We feel like when we work with schools that have these foundational beliefs, SEL is a natural kind of next step or a natural extension of this into their work. So we wanted to ask just very briefly if you could let us know the extent to which you're already pretty comfortable with the language around SEL. We didn't want to make assumptions that everybody was familiar with the language and the structures and the competencies around SEL. So David, is there a way that folks could either just type a little note, or the people who are there could just speak up and let us know? We like to do like a 0 to 5, fist to 5. If 0 is not too sure what this stuff's all about, and 5 is, I've got a secret PhD in SEL. Is there a way folks could just turn on their mics?
I think so. Let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and turn all the mics on, so you certainly can speak out if you'd like, or if you type into the Q&A box. What did we say? Did we say 5 was secret PhD in SEL, and 1 maybe is not as comfortable with it? So let's do that. I've turned all the mics on. If anyone wants to kind of talk, or you can just type it into the Q&A box, whatever you prefer.
There's no right or wrong answer. Just give us a steer on how much time to spend on this introductory phase.
So I'm seeing a 3. That's a good one.
Mhm.
Sandra, Janice?
Janice won't say, but she's a 5.
She's probably a 5. Yeah. So yeah.
5.
Janice is constantly learning.
And we've got another 3, maybe 4. So we've got someone kind of 3, 3.5 maybe.
That's
So
really
yeah, it gives you a feel for the room.
Yeah, and I would think anybody that even for our people who are going to watch this on demand later, I think that those people who have been involved in Episcopal schools for any length of time are somewhat familiar with all of these, because it really does match well with what we're doing in our schools.
Well, especially the dignity of every human being. I mean, that's language that comes right out of the baptismal covenant. And so whenever someone has either been baptized or has participated in a baptismal service, that's one of the questions that's asked of the candidates is, will you respect the dignity of every human being? And as Nick said, this is so central to the reason behind SEL.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So the definition that we've just put up here on this slide, there are many definitions out there. We like this one in particular for a few simple reasons. The first is that it really talks about SEL being a process. Unlike some other disciplines, this isn't something that you sort of graduate out of, or you take the class and you're done with. This is a lifelong process of learning SEL skills. One of our colleagues who teaches middle school likes to think about SEL being something that you learn, practice, forget, and then have to relearn, practice, and forget. And sort of you keep in that cycle forever. And we know in our adult relationships how crucial all of these skills are to our happiness and our flourishing. So the idea that this is never too early to do this work, but it's also never too late to keep working on these skills. And while we do agree with the final point there that this is critical to the success of all schools, it's also something that's much wider than that. We don't have to look too far to see the critical need for these skills and competencies about caring for others, making good decisions, behaving ethically. Our world really needs these competencies, and there's probably never been a more important time for us to be focusing on this work in schools. So when we talk about the definition of SEL, what better way than to bring in the student voice? This is Supriya. She was a student that both Rasha and I taught. She joined a school that had SEL as part of their curriculum in the middle school. I would say she was a pretty typical adolescent, where maybe some of the SEL activities we did through advisory or through other classes got a little bit of an eye roll or a little healthy skepticism. And maybe at the time, like with many things, we didn't quite know if this was sinking in and having an impact for her. And we couldn't have been, more delighted when we reached out to her to ask if she would come and speak on a panel. And she said, hey, I can't come to speak on the panel, but I'd love to write you something. And so she wrote this If you just look at the key words that are highlighted there, it really speaks to how these skills come from a curriculum, but end up just being part of a person's way of being. And Supriya really embodied this concept that, you know, this is a way of interacting with each other and with yourself. She really explains that sort of dynamic process that we mentioned on the previous slide. So when we think about all of our curriculum, our content we teach in schools, we know every discipline has its own language, right? Math does, English, literature, science, and SEL has its own set of competencies. Again, there are variations on this. This is the one that the language that we really like. Our curriculum resources that we share with schools build on these as the 5 competencies. The first 2 there are really about the intrapersonal domain, so within ourselves. You can see the definitions there, and these slides we can share with you obviously afterwards. But the idea of those first 2 is really, how do we know the feelings that we're experiencing? Can we name them? Can we identify them? And then when those feelings occur, do we have some tools, some skills that might help us manage them? So if we're just about to enter a big test when I'm an 11th grader and I'm pretty stressed about it, I'm pretty anxious, do I have some skills and some tools to get myself into a good place to really succeed at that test? Or if I'm a younger student going into middle school for the first time and I'm super nervous about starting in a new school, do I have some of those skills and competencies to get myself manage those emotions? But also we know emotions can be much more difficult than that. They might involve feeling anxious or nervous or angry. So those first 2 competencies are really about the very practical naming and managing our emotions. Sometimes that second one is called self-regulation in the literature as well. The second 2 sets of competencies you can see are obviously then about the social dimension, the social domain, social awareness. How can we tune into the feelings of others, observe them, notice them, maybe wonder what's going on from their perspective? And our relationship skills we build, things like conflict resolution, building good friendships, knowing when a friendship or a relationship is good for you or where it's maybe not so healthy for you so much anymore. We see those first 4 all coming together in the very practical final competency, which is about responsible decision making. And I'd like to add the word action in there. So it's about making good decisions, but it's also taking that into action, which obviously leads back to the Episcopal tenets of that we mentioned earlier as well. How can we make good decisions for ourselves and for the world around us? So we're an organization that believes in the power of metaphor. I want to share 3 metaphors with you that just frame a little bit about how I think SEL can be most effectively seen through in a school. We don't think that SEL is a program in a way that perhaps it might have historically been seen. We really think that it has to go beyond just the curriculum resources or just the particular tools. So from our perspective, SEL can be seen as an approach. And when it's seen that way, it really opens us up to the expansive view of how social and emotional competencies can support everyone in our community. It's a much broader perspective. So the first metaphor of how to maybe see SEL is as an umbrella. You could see that SEL is an umbrella for lots of the other really great, thoughtful practices that are going on in your schools. So let's say, for example, you have some mindfulness work or some meditation curriculum or resources being used in your school. You could see that SEL could be the umbrella under which those sort of initiatives or programs might exist. Lots of other examples that you can probably think of there of how SEL could be seen as the overarching support for that. The second metaphor is that you could think of SEL being the foundation. I know many of the schools that we've worked with do a lot of work around restorative justice and relationship repair. And if you think about what tools and skills our young people need in order to effectively resolve conflict or repair relationships, or when there's been a breakdown of relationships on campus, how they can bring people back together, they need the foundational tools of SEL to do that effectively. You need students to be able to talk about their feelings and to be able to resolve conflicts with each other in order to be able to do that really important work of repairing where there's been injustice or where there's been a breakdown. So yes, the umbrella is one option, the foundation. The third one that we often refer to is the lens. We think if we were to put on our SEL lens, our SEL glasses, and look at our schools, our education, our teaching, our learning, we may see things in a way that helps us inform and make better decisions about the way in which we're designing experiences for students. So the lens in particular is the one we wanted to zoom in on. So inviting you just to see that list of competencies in a slightly more dynamic way here. You can see the intra and the interpersonal lens right in the middle there. And imagine these being actual glasses you're sort of going to pop on right now and look through. You can see around those inner lenses, we have our competencies. On the left, the intrapersonal of self and self-management, self-awareness, and on the right, social awareness and relationship skills, all coming together through personal decision-making. One thing that we think is really helpful is when we think, what does that actually look like? When do we see and how do we know students are developing these competencies? And that's the sort of skills and qualities around the outside. So maybe if we look in the top right, the ability to give encouragement, to really listen, to offer caring support and compassion, are all things we would notice and see that would let us know that our social awareness competency was being developed or deepened. So this is just a very different way, maybe a less linear way to look at this work of SEL. And finally, before we pause for a second and invite you to do something, have an experience, we wanted to share a little bit about what SEL from our perspective is, but also what it isn't. Sometimes there is confusion that SEL can be seen as a form of therapy or therapeutic. And we're very clear that we're not asking teachers or educators to become counselors. There are people who are very well trained in that. They do it for many years. But what this is just honoring that in every classroom, there is an emotional domain. And when we can open that up, facilitate it, experience it, and discover it, we get a sense of education much more broadly than just our curriculum area. Skipping down to the middle point here, the connection with discipline. I mentioned already that SEL is a really important sort of foundation for effective relationship repair, or kids taking responsibility for their actions and being able to make good when something not so good has maybe happened. But SEL isn't discipline. They are separate processes, but they're obviously connected. SEL really takes a much more problem-solving approach to that. And the final one, I'll pop back up in a second here, is just seeing that really SEL is not a detour from academics. We're not taking away curriculum time from our math curriculum or our science or history. We're really providing an on-ramp for all learning.
Great. So let's take a minute. David, I don't know if you would allow their mics to be on again, just in case they're willing to share. We're going to talk a few minutes about this process of checking in, which is a ritual that we believe in strongly in classrooms, also with adults, with families, with faculties. And so I'm curious, before I talk a little bit about it, how many of you are doing check-in? Maybe you could say, or either type in the Q&A, if this is a process that you regularly use in your classroom or even in your organizations or families.
So all the mics are on, so feel free. I'm actually going to ask Sandra if she wouldn't mind kicking us off with the response to that question.
Sure. And if you call me Sandy, that would be great.
Oh, Sandy, you bet.
Yeah, thanks. So we, our administration team, which is a really great group, we check in regularly, at least weekly. There are a lot of opportunities in addition to that, that people check in with meetings during the week. I would say though, that one of the things that I'm really excited about this webinar for is, and it was mentioned earlier, is to make things more system-wide and mindful in terms of creating those opportunities to check in and really routines of check-in. Because I think right now it's happening, but in a more individual way. Teachers have different ways of doing it. Sometimes it happens more than others. So I think creating an environment where it's just a part of what we do regularly is really important for me to help facilitate at our school.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. And that's amazing that already the adults are modeling and experiencing it. We try to start with all the adults so that they'll know what it feels like and really have some challenge and really get comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it, wherever they're starting. Heather, how about you? Any part you want to share about check-in?
Well, I mean, organizationally, I think at our board meetings, we always do that, which I think is really important for a group that's not really together a lot. So we do that. I mean, we do it as a staff a little bit as well. And, you know, here recently, because everyone's kind of homebound, we have, we've been having some web chats with our chaplains and had one today with ECE directors. So, you know, that, again, that systems approach, you know, if the kids see it modeled, you know, by adults, on a, you know, in that kind of professional environment or in a school environment and any organizational environment, it's, it can be really valuable, but then it also reminds you as an adult that you need that as well. So.
Right, and such a good point. We really believe that that teacher wellness piece is so important, that when we go into work with schools, we're really working with the teachers first, and we're very experiential, hands-on, so that the teachers can really have a part in the lesson, and again, be challenged by it, reflect on it, so that there's more, they have more investment when they're actually teaching it, and they can really believe in it. And I think check-in is one of those that's really important in terms of just dipping your toe in, because we know culturally it's very different to talk about feelings, and we really want to respect that. We want to give students as long as they need to be comfortable checking in, so we really believe in the ability to pass. And I'll say that today because we're going to ask you to in a minute, and you're certainly able to pass, since we are an interesting group from just met and we're all around the world. But we wanted to introduce you to a couple of different ways and also let you have the ability to check in. And I'm glad it sounds like you guys are doing that already. I want to show this slide because young people told us from a very young age that they have different feelings sometimes all at the same time, layers of feelings. And so we've broken this down, and I think you might particularly enjoy it because they added the spirit in there. And some students really feel like sometimes their spirit feels differently than their mind or their body, but we tell them just to pick whichever ones resonate with them. And then we start to build that emotional vocabulary, as you'll see in those, the list under each part, just to help them start to get familiar with what an emotion feels like in their body and to be able to name it. So if you take a look here, I'm sure you've seen just kind of a rating scale, just a numerical rating scale from low to high. And we try to talk to students about, and teachers about, not labeling feelings or how it's not really helpful because all feelings are informative. And even anger is a really informative, healthy emotion. It's what we do with it. So we kind of like to rate the intensity of emotions just from low to high. And you can use these numerical scales, really easy to do around the family, dinner table, in the car, with your students. But I think because of our group, Nick, I'm just gonna risk it and go with this other one. I think you guys are a little advanced group. So we're gonna introduce you to this one that you've probably seen before. It's one we like a lot. It's the high, low, and hero of your day. So the high is, you know, kind of the good part, high part of your day, the low, and then your hero, just someone that shared something important that you looked up to, that inspired you today. So maybe if you think about any one of those that you want to share, you could share all three because we're such a small group. If you don't want to share, that's absolutely fine. But we would love to just kind of have this time to let you share if you'd like, either your high, low, hero, or all three.
Well, I'm going to jump right in.
Yay!
So the high part of the day, I'm going to focus on day because you want to talk about different types and layers of emotions. That's been the entire week, 2 weeks. So I'm going to focus on the day. High point of today has been talking with one of my heads of school and just hearing the amazing things that her faculty is doing in very, very challenging circumstances. So it was just that was a high point of the day. Tough part of the day today has been all the questions that are coming out in connection with the new paid sick leave legislation. And there are so many unanswered questions, and that's tough, being asked all these questions that we're still trying to figure out and not being able to answer those questions and give my heads the answers that they need. That's been tough. And the hero today, that's an easy one. That's our board treasurer, because we're doing some, obviously, you know, we have a multi-year financial plan in place for the association. Well, that's changing a little bit just in light of the climate. So we had a really great conversation today about doing some different forecasting, different scenarios, and he definitely gets the prize for the hero, because we're in a great position to be able to respond to whatever scenario comes out of the next academic year.
Thank you, David. Anyone else?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, I'd be willing to share. I'd love to share.
Thank you.
So tough part of the day or week has been that on top of everything happening with our school and coronavirus, my husband and I had a pipe break in our ceiling and flood our house. And I was in a bicycle accident not too long ago and am having some healing difficulties. So it's sort of like everything's hitting at once. The good part of today is this webinar, which is terrific. And I think the other really good thing that's been happening this week is related to check-in just across the miles. So many people that I'm texting and are texting me, and we're just checking in with each other. How are you doing? Are you okay? How are you feeling? So, which is great. And then my hero is a really unlikely, interesting person that I don't even know, but yesterday I was out for a walk on the path near our house, and a road runner ran across the path in front of me, and there was a gentleman that was sitting at a little picnic bench who might have been homeless, but at any rate, he stopped me and he said, "Did you see that road runner?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Did you see that it climbed up into the tree? That was so awesome and unusual. And I just thought I just wanted to share that with you." I almost started crying. It was just very interesting experience, and just made me realize the power of human connection, no matter where it may happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That was Sandy, right?
Yep, Sandy.
Yeah, I'll share. I would say, I would agree with David that it's hard to pick in the week. But I will say that for me, the high of the week, if I'm going to do that, is that I'm finally feeling like I'm getting into a routine and not feeling so out of whack, so distracted and unsure, and looking at, you know, I'm staying away from, I'm limiting the content that I get on the news. I'm severely limiting it, which has been a game changer for me. So I think that's created a couple of really good days in a row, where now all the ideas of how we can serve our schools has started to come back. And so that's been really, I think, a high. You know, for the low, I think, again, it's just the waking up each day going, okay, what's in it for today? Because the not knowing who's going to call and be having a hard time, or, you know, my husband we're both small businesses, and he's been a small business owner for a long time, and that's challenging. And we're not, you know, I've got a kid who's in college and stayed up there, and one who's in grad school who came home. And so just not it being a whole family, I think, has been probably a little bit hard on me this week, but that's improving. Gosh, the hero, I think for me, I'm going to throw out that the heroes for me right now are the heads of school. I mean, honestly, I talked to one today who I said, you know, after 17 years, I would have thought that there wasn't anything that I couldn't speak on. And I've just got nothing really to speak on when it comes to a worldwide pandemic. We're trying so much of what we're doing, David and I are doing right now, is just trying to love on people and encourage people and help them navigate something that we don't even know how to navigate. And so the heroes for me are those school heads who are really doing the work and going every day and working and navigating something that they really have no idea how to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So well said.
Yep.
And one thing that's been so nice, I think, for me, is I've been in touch with a lot of teachers, and even my own kids' teachers are using check-in and virtual advisories and virtual classrooms. My son's teacher was doing a check-in, and I think it's really helping kids stay connected and feel like they can hear other people's perspective and what's happening. And as you even saw in just the few of us that shared, you can just see what an empathy builder it is, and an understanding builder, and just to get a perspective from different kids and different feelings in the room or in the virtual room. I think we'll move on. It's hard not seeing you, so if anybody else wanted to share, you certainly can.
I would just add that, check-in as a tool is one of the many sort of regular rituals and practices that we recommend and introduce in schools. It's often something that is happening, and we just like to find ways to keep it fresh, keep it really creative, have kids take ownership and a bit of leadership for it as they get older and have their versions of check-in feature. So it's something that is a cornerstone, but it's just one of the many practices that we know can be really helpful as a ritual for students to begin and also to check out sometimes and end their day or end their class with.
And really powerful for the adults in the room to do it with them, because they're so curious about their lives as well. And I'm really also just so grateful to hear that you're doing it in some of your organization and faculty meetings already. So that's just an example of one of those tools that was on the lens and part of that, building that foundational self-awareness piece that we try to start with, and that's so important. We'll move on now to a little bit of research for you.
Yeah, I mean, Rush, maybe I'll just cover this slide and then we'll skip to the framework after this. So we just wanted to sort of acknowledge and share that it's obviously very important that the work we do in schools is evidence-led and evidence-based, and that there's really good sort of psychological and educational research that's underpinning this work. And I think when we rewind the 11 years now to when we started the Institute in 2009, we had to do a lot of the digging around ourselves to try and find this research and pull it together in a way that was helpful to share with schools. Thankfully, in the last 10 years, a lot has happened. This document is probably the best synthesis that we have come across of why this work is important and what the features of good school-based social emotional learning should be. So it's a document by the Aspen Institute. We can send you in our, when we send the slides, we'll send you the hyperlink to go straight to their website for this. But briefly, they set out these 4 consensus statements, which summarize all of the research that's been done, many different studies that they cite that underpin why this work is so crucial for learning and crucial for our schools to flourish and our kids to flourish. And maybe if I could just pick out 2 things from it. The report's actually very succinct, so it's not a big read. Could be a great faculty read for some of your teachers maybe. But the 2 things that just jump out from it, section B really speaks about these skills being something that can be taught, and that students can really learn these skills, which is obvious perhaps. But the part that was really exciting to me was that the evidence suggests that not only can these skills be taught, but that they stick over time. So we might learn them in 1st grade and then build on them in 2nd and 3rd, and then those skills stick with students. They remember them, they practice them. And when these things are done consistently over time, we see that the students build and keep those skills as they grow older. But the final part of that research was the bit that perhaps is really exciting, which is that the evidence suggests that not only can they be taught and they do stick, but they can also transfer. So while they may learn them in school, the evidence is there that they will then use those skills in summer camp or when they're out on a field trip, or when they go off to college, or when they're on an internship or out into the world of work or in their personal relationships. So they can be taught, they do stick, and they transfer. The part that is often really focused on is around the benefit for academic outcomes. So research suggests that students who have advanced SEL skills or have had these skills nurtured at school tend to do better academically. Lots of reasons for that, pretty straightforward. But what often is not mentioned is that beyond academics, there are so many other outcomes that are improved as a result of kids having these skills. So a reduction in risk-taking behavior, better engagement with learning, a better ability to resolve conflict, always extending that out into the world of work. People tend to do better in the workplace. They are much better managers. They're better at motivating teams. We also know on a personal level that they tend to find longer term relationships and be able to resolve differences in their relationships and marriages that they may have. These are skills that do spread pretty far and wide. Sandy, did you raise a hand? No, I just saw your hand pop up for a second.
I think that may be from earlier.
Oh, yep. Sorry, I'll lower my hand. There we go.
No,
Sorry about that.
I'd love to hear from you if you have something to say though. Rush, do you want to skip to the framework slide?
I will.
So there is lots of research. It's something that we're happy to talk to you all separately about, but that one document is a great starting point. So just as we're looking towards sort of sharing for the final few minutes, we wanted to reference the things we've learned over the years about how this work can come alive effectively in schools. We have a whole community framework. It's got 5 parts to it. And when we work with schools, we're really supporting development in these 5 areas. And just very briefly to cover them, the first is the student toolbox, otherwise known as kind of the curriculum or the lessons. This is where in your advisory or in your religious studies or in your classroom meetings, wherever this work is going to be taught or nurtured, that there are lessons that are scaffolded and sequenced over time thoughtfully that teach these skills explicitly to kids, give them a chance to practice them and hone them. Those lessons that we recommend are really creative. It's kind of not a worksheet in sight, but we try to find ways for kids to really access this work in ways that are surprising and engaging, and that they get to experience first and foremost how these skills can feel and what they look like and sound like. So that's the student toolbox. The teacher toolbox is kind of the yin and the yang to this. So whilst we have these curriculum resources, the way in which they're taught and the way in which teachers are teaching their curriculum area, whether it's math or science, we know that has a role to play in building SEL. So there's a whole range of teacher pedagogical practices, of tools that all teachers can have in their backpack, in their toolbox, which can bring their curriculum alive and deepen the SEL that's in every class. So that might be something like, how do we design group experiences, group projects in a way that really nurture that sense of social awareness and relationship skills, those 2 of the 5 SEL competencies? Or how do we really use things like metaphor or surprise or silence to deepen our learning and have more of an emotional connection to the subject matter? So they're the first 2. The other 3 really relate to kind of slightly bigger picture topics. So school-wide systems, really those things that underpin all of our schools, and how can we make sure that they are in some way aligned to support SEL. Connections to home is the 4th one. Rush mentioned earlier about the importance of being in partnership with parents for this work, helping them understand what's going on in the SEL program of a school, and giving them some similar language and tools to extend that learning into the home environment. And finally, responsive opportunities. When things happen on campus, whether it's a joyful moment or a difficult moment, how we respond as educators to that moment can really model and reinforce good SEL for students. And those minute by minute, second by second things that happen all the time in schools can be sometimes the best learning opportunities. So that's the framework. Rush and I just wanted to pick 2 to touch on very briefly. We're going to dive into the student toolbox and just give you an example, and then we'll touch on the school-wide systems part.
So this is an example of our student toolbox. And if you think about it, as the left side being the younger elementary years, the foundational tools. You'll see things like check-in and win-win solutions, cooling off and appreciations. And this is all done really nicely in the younger years. However, we know that sometimes schools, for many reasons, don't have this implemented by then. So certainly we've done this work with 5th graders starting, 6th graders starting there on the left side. And if you think about those arrows moving up as the kids mature and progress in the grades, they're really working more on using their assertive voice as they get older and preteens. They are still wanting to and needing to encourage each other and try not to assume, try to forgive each other. They really, we know this especially now, need to work on managing their stress and how they can still cool off. But as a teenager and college student, how can they use those breaths and the visual relaxation that they did when they were little? I had my 8th graders used to beg for the visual relaxation during class. And I thought they were joking and trying to get away from schoolwork, but they really, really needed it and wanted to bring that back into their more academic day. They're working on things like acknowledgement and their own personal boundaries. So you can see how the toolbox really is for all ages. And if you look on the right side, I think you'll also see how you probably are also working on those things as an adult. We're never really done with social emotional learning. It's a journey, and we're always practicing and strengthening these skills. And I think that's something that's really refreshing for students to know, that adults, their teachers, are working on those skills. So this diagram kind of shows you how the lessons and the curriculum can spiral through, starting with the basic emotion vocabulary that we mentioned with checking in and learning about emotions. What are the names of emotions? How can I identify them? And then working to kind of put them into a formula with the I message, speaking from I. And those on the left, if you'll think of those as really the speaking tools, as opposed to the right, those are really the listening tools. And we know that both need and take practice. To be a really strong and effective listener, we need to practice. It's not easy. And we are constantly telling kids in school, just listen, you're not listening. And a lot of times they just need to know what does that look like? And they need to have time in school to practice and get better. And if you think about this from a young age with that emotion vocabulary, but then building all the way up to what Nick mentioned earlier, to being a young adult and having that open mindset and having really this sense of civility in our world that we so desperately need, and being able to look at problems and other people's perspective from that open mindset and be able to listen, to understand and forgive each other and live together in a world where we might disagree so strongly, but be able to respect each other. I think that's what we're hoping for, that these skills will be so strongly integrated in these communities and within a person that they really feel like they can live in a world that way. So we're going to skip to just one more. I know we are pushing against time here, so I want to show you an example of the systems.
So when we mentioned earlier about this idea of school-wide systems, I bet you can already think of the whole range of systems and structures that exist in our schools that in some way interrelate and connect with the practices and the principles of social and emotional learning. So if we take an obvious one, maybe mentoring and advisory, you can see right in the middle there in red. Our mentoring and advisory programs, particularly in middle and high schools, often are the place where SEL is taught explicitly in middle and high schools often. But the way in which those programs are designed, how often they meet, how the students are grouped, all of those sort of design principles of advisory can be informed through the lens of SEL. And when we do that, we open up a space for that program to really come alive and for it to have greater meaning for students. I would say maybe 2/3 of the inquiries we have from schools are really around advisory and helping them look at starting or refining or renewing an advisory program. We see them being so important, especially in this time when students are just desperate for that authentic sense of connection. But maybe some more, some less obvious ones here. What about in HR and in hiring? How aligned are our HR practices and our hiring practices to really be looking for teachers who embody and want to nurture these skills in students? And similarly, in our work with, helping teachers develop in their own practice, do the principles of SEL kind of inform what that is like? We think that's a particularly important one because teachers, I think, are the first to notice where there's a disconnect between the values and the principles that sometimes are on paper or in our mission statements, or that we spend a lot of PD time around. And then if there's something about the way in which they are treated themselves that doesn't quite match with that. And it's a great thing for schools to be able to reflect on and refine and find ways to actually bring greater clarity and unity in their purpose. Maybe just one more example around trips. We know schools do so much hard work to make trips these rewarding and hugely valuable experiences. And sometimes we notice that the SEL lens on those trips can be missing. So how do we help students be ready emotionally so that the trips can be fun and enjoyable and engaging for them? Do we help them talk about and process their feelings in advance? What about on the trip? Moments for appreciation, reflection, and gratitude on the trip itself, if it's a camping trip or if it's a trip abroad or even just a trip to the zoo. How can we help students really honor that moment? But also then when we return, the reflection, unpacking what happened and sharing their feelings and thoughts. And we can find that the trip that was designed can have this whole nother layer of educational value when we look at it through the SEL lens. So there are many more examples there. I bet that you could think of many more yourselves that are already related. But our work with schools and how we like to support them is to say, let's look at your systems. Let's find the ones that are really reinforcing SEL and let's activate that even more. But then if there are some that are maybe, could I say, out of alignment or not quite supporting your mission around SEL or your hope for more SEL, then maybe we could address those and look at fine tuning or redesigning those systems a little bit.
I think we would wanted to leave a little bit of time just for questions. David, do we have time for that?
We do. Let's do that. So I've got all the mics unmuted. And so let's just take the few minutes that we have to see if there's any other questions, any other comments. We'll just use the rest of the time for that.
Well, gosh, I have to say that I just think that that this is incredible. I was kind of thinking the whole time you were talking about what a gift this would be going forward, especially in our schools right now, because of what the students have just gone through or what they're going through. And I particularly think that the idea around learning to name emotions is just an area that is, for me as a former head of school, I wish that we tried to do a lot of that, but this idea of teaching kids to be able to actually name what they're feeling, if you could just do that, wow, what a difference maker that would be. So I think that's really important.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Sandy.
Yes.
Our school is really ripe for looking at system-wide implementation. There are, as I think maybe Nick, you said, pockets of things. But the slide in particularly, the particular slide that resonated was the school-wide systems opportunities for SEL and how to build that into the system. My question, I guess, is what's the, first of all, I'd love to get a copy of the webinar and the slides, if that's possible. And then secondly, how would it best be to collaborate, or how best to proceed to collaborate as a school, as many others have with the Institute?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. I think probably at the root of your question is about the significant or the commitment to this work that we know is required to see through the changes that honeycomb diagram of all the systems really represents. So when we talk to schools, we're often saying to them, look, this is a 2-year journey, 2 or 3 year journey from where you might be now to seeing the changes work through your school, seeing your teachers' skill development really come up, and seeing your students' skills take root as well. That doesn't mean that in the first 6 months you won't see some really great differences and some new growth in your community, but to get it to be a kind of a systemic change, we all know takes time in education and an ongoing commitment.
Yes.
The way in which we as an institute like to work with schools is each year we take on partnerships with 6, 7 or 8 schools, and we try to do really deep work with a small number of schools. And that involves co-creating a really bespoke path of consulting and professional development. We know, as Rush said, the experiential professional development is really core to this. But before we get to that, we need to make sure we understand each school, we understand your culture, your history, your context, what experience you've had with SEL before that maybe didn't go so well or did go well, so that we can be attuned to that as we begin to step into work with teachers. We also love to be able to support teachers by doing demo lessons and co-teaching with them. Through that work and working with parents, we can see those changes really begin to come around. But the consultancy part is where the school-wide systems come in, and the nice thing is we can do a lot of that virtually, supporting your ICL committee or your leadership team to look at those. But we can send you the link to where to find out more information about that program if it's helpful.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy.
And Sandy, a copy of the webinar will live in the SAES webinar library.
Okay.
So you'll be able to access it that way. And then Nick or Rush, if you send slides, we can post those as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we were hoping, if it's okay with you, if you would, I don't know if you allow David to give us your email, or if you can put it in the Q&A box, we can also send you some information directly too.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I'll do that right now.
Okay.
I'm going to provide both my work and my personal email.
Thanks,
Perfect. You can, if you type that in the don't go to the Q&A, if you'll type it in the chat.
Oh,
And
okay.
It'll well, either way, but if you type it in the chat, it'll pop up. I think it's easier for them to see it.
Okay, I'll put it in chat.
But for those of you watching a recording of this, you have Rush and my email addresses there. Our website is just the tail end of that email address, instituteforsel.net. Please get in touch. We're happy to have sort of conversations with you as you get to the point of watching this, and we can answer any questions that you have as you begin to think about this work for you.
Yes, and we love the Texas area. We love all areas, but we do have a virtual workshop coming up there. We're just working on the dates. So if you're interested in attending that, please do check our website, and that will be posted. I know David said he'll probably send it around as well, but that should be coming up in the next probably several months.
Well, Nick, Rush, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Look forward to meeting some of you in the future.
Well done. It was great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Mary.
so
Thanks.
much. This is wonderful.